is Mike Langford. Welcome to another episode of the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast. This week on the show, Tom Rieman, the CEO and founding partner of Practice Intel, is here to talk about cracking the code on the anemic organic growth problem that many financial advisors and wealth management firms have been facing in recent years. Our conversation is super nerdy, but if you are a wealth management executive charged with growing your business, this is a can't miss conversation for you. Also, if you like this episode, make sure you check out Tom's appearance on Matt Reiner's Bridging the Gap podcast and tell Matt I sent you. Okay, lastly, if you haven't done so already, please do make sure you subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Amazon, the YouTubes, or wherever you like to get your podcast jam on. And if you have a question or a suggestion for a topic or a guest, hit me up. I'm basically at Mike Langford everywhere, or send me an email, podcast@finservmarketing.com. Okay, let's get to the conversation with Tom Rieman. Well, Tom Rieman, so wonderful to see you, buddy. Welcome to the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast.
Well, Mike, thanks so much, man. I'm really psyched to be here, and I love the topic, modern, about time.
It is modern, right? Exactly. It's funny, we named it that the show because originally the show was the valuations podcast, and we were producing the show for a company that was helping advisors value their business and improve the valuation of their business. But at a certain point in time, we're like, we don't want to just talk about valuations. And I started thinking about it because we were also talking a lot about helping advisors navigate from owning a practice to owning a business. And we're like, really what you need to do is modernize your business, right? You need to start thinking about this more as I'm running a book of business and so forth. It's like, no, you're running a business, right? And you're running a business, in this case, in 2024. So I'm glad you approve of the name.
Yeah, well, not to get ahead of get ahead of this, but not only do you want to run a business, but you want to run a business that is offering a modern value proposition as well, right?
Yeah.
I think it was a Warren Buffett a little bit, and he said he's never seen a business that has been maniacally focused on the client and the consumer in the moment that hasn't been successful. And I think when we talk about our business, we're still very advisor centric versus client centric, but I know we're going to get into all that.
That's great. Awesome. That's good. That's a great way to tee it up. All right. So let's dive right into it. During our prep call, you mentioned that you and your team at Practice Intel have cracked the code on organic growth. And I think that's a great place to start off our conversation today, because according to a 2023 Fidelity RIA benchmarking study, organic growth rates were hovering around 3.2 to 3.6%, depending upon the AUM level of the firm. And then, according to an earlier study by PriceMetrix by McKinsey, and actually I had Kieran Bowl on this show a couple of times to talk about this stuff, 75% of growth for advisors since 2015 is due to market performance, not organic growth. And worse yet, what he and his team found that 40% of advisors are operating their businesses in net negative asset growth, meaning more money's going out, the
Yeah.
business is shrinking every year. So, as you might imagine, cracking the code on organic growth is something that folks in our audience and the industry at large are really interesting to do. So, let's dive into it, man. Like, where do you start cracking the code on this problem?
Well, first of all, it's to better understand the data you just talked about. So yes, we see organic growth rates at 2, 3, 4% or whatever they are, but that's actually a misnomer because that's a general organic growth rate. And by the way, there's no such thing as a general event. There's very specific events that all add up to some generality. So really, when you look at organic growth, as you indicated by the other metric, that 75% of advisors are only seeing growth through market gains. Most advisors are not realizing any organic growth, but there's a small percentage that are realizing extensive organic growth. So McKinsey research from last year that I think is really powerful shows that the top decile, let me rephrase that, shows that there are 10% of advisors that are realizing 28 new households a year. Now, if we said 200 households is the average, that equates to something like 15% organic growth. But then that drops dramatically to 12 in the next decile, which is a little bit of organic growth. and then to 7 by the second quartile, which given attrition rates at 5-6%, that's pretty much going to be negative growth. So the first thing to look at is what does organic growth actually look like? And there is a small subset that has very robust organic growth. Then the next question might be like, why is that happening, right? And I don't know, like Mike, you might think this, but it's just the rich getting richer, right? It's the really good advisors just being the really good advisors.
Yeah. I,
Please.
well, I was gonna say, like, I mean, part of me is like, okay, when I think about, I think about any business, right? When are you achieving your fastest organic growth? Well, at the beginning, right? You're out there hustling, you're bringing on new assets, new clients, right? Because you have to, you got to build your business, right? And because the way our industry is structured, it's recurring revenue, right? So you go out and if you get one client, great. That client is now a client, hopefully for decades to come. And then you get another client. Now your revenue continues to grow, and your asset base continues to grow. Because if you're a younger advisor, not only did you acquire new clients and new assets, but those clients are also bringing on new assets because they're in the asset accumulation phase of their lifespan and their journey with you. But as you get, at a certain apex and then inflection point, one would assume, uh, you stop accumulating clients as robustly, right? So it's a really fascinating thing. I'm really thrilled to dig into it.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
but why, right? I mean, so yeah, let's face it, was younger advisors, and I think the latest Cerulli report showed something like, and we know this, 80% of new advisors wash out, right? So those that actually make it past that third year, it's a very small subset, and they have
Yeah,
to because they have to eat, they have to pay rent or a mortgage. They're
yeah,
driven. And then as advisors get more mature in their practice and their business, and let's face it, there's some that say, "Hey, listen, I want to play golf 3 days a week. I'm good. It's a lifestyle practice. I'm fine," and that's okay. We'll push those aside. But I think the majority of advisors still want to grow, and the question is why? And this really gets to the fundamental issue around cracking the code to organic growth. Why aren't they realizing more organic growth, which we'll define here as simply driven by really enthusiastic advocacy on the part of their own clients? I mean, why isn't it happening? I mean, I can
yeah.
answer it, but I'm going to throw it back at you, Mike.
No,
What do you
no,
think?
that's like we'll get there. We'll get to well, and it's funny, I'm sure it's different for every advisor, but, I wanna talk about the let me take one little tiny step back to, like, kinda
Mhm.
address the audience a little bit, right? Because we have 2 primary audiences for this show. Financial advisors, as one would expect the modern financial advisor, show to have, and wealth management professionals who work for firms like broker-dealers, large RIAs, and asset management firms who, service the advisors, right? So they're looking for organic growth for the company, right? So their job is, if you are a practice management professional at a large independent broker dealer, you want to grow your advisor pool, right? So that's growing your business. You're bringing on new advisors, and you're trying to help your existing advisors grow their business because that grows your business. But as you mentioned, some advisors in that population are like, "Hey, I'm comfy. I'm making $500,000 a year, $1,000,000 a year. Well, maybe it's only, $300,000 a year, right? So they're not necessarily, as you mentioned, some of them playing a lot of golf. So I always think that, like, they've hit this plateau because either they've got to a comfort level,
Mhm.
spending time with the kids, golfing, traveling with the wife, whatever that is, or they've hit a capacity issue. And that capacity issue could be based on their own human competency. Like, I can't handle this anymore in relationships, or because, they don't know how to grow the business beyond their own capabilities, they've hit a capacity of like, "Hey, there's just only so many hours in the day, right? I only have so much technology to bear." So, uh, what can these wealth management leaders do to kinda drive those plateaued advisors, if you will, into action to get growing?
Yeah, no, that a really good question, and you're right with the sort of the differences, the similar goals, but the different frames of reference from advisors to
Yeah.
the C-suite. So I'd argue it's data. So Mike
Mm.
Durbin, uh, CEO of Cetera Holdings, just said at a conference the other week. He said, "Data is the key to organic growth." Now let me back up. He said, "Data hydrates." After he said, "Data is the key to organic growth," but then he
Okay,
said,
I like
"Data
it.
hydrates," and I just love that phrase. It's data in a large part, and for a variety of reasons, three in particular. First is, what do we do about those advisors that say they don't want to grow anymore? Now, I'd push back a little on that, and I'd say there's far fewer
Yeah,
that say they don't want to grow or they've reached such capacity they can't. Those are the top decile probably already. And I think a lot of times it's advisors that don't want to change or engage in any change, which in turn may drive growth. Like, I'm good. I don't need to change what I'm doing. So the power of data starts with data as a motivator, right? Data is an irrefutable moment of truth. So Mike, you're saying, I don't need to lose weight. You're whatever height you are, and you step on a scale and you're, way off the charts in terms of what you should be. There's hard data, irrefutable data that
yeah,
maybe you do need to do something, right? And so that's where it starts, is data around the advisor and client relationship. The primary way we can motivate advisors to change is through data. And I love the phrase Mike Durbin, the CEO of Cetera Holdings, used the other week at the FSI conference. He said data is the key to organic growth. But then he went further and said data hydrates. And I love that because hydrating brings life to things. And so, really, data can do three things in the context of driving change. It really can create a virtuous cycle. So, to start, data can motivate, right? Data becomes that irrefutable moment of truth. You may think you're doing really well on something, but when you see hard data, and in the case of advisors, you see hard data about what their clients are saying about the experience, about the advice, which is what we do at Practice Intel. It creates that moment where they're like, hey, I can't argue with that. It's irrefutable. So that's the first thing. It
yeah,
motivates. But it's sort of motivating on a discomfort level. Now, behavioral psychologists will say that actually driving action and motivation, discomfort is actually a key driver. But then the other thing data does, and this is really important in our business and important in what kind of data we actually look at, and that is that data can provide strategic direction. So, really good business analytics tell us
yeah.
not only how we're doing, but they're telling us what we should work on. And a lot of our
Mm,
metrics in our industry that are more advisor centric metrics about the client versus what we use, which are client centric measures about the advisor, provide very
mm.
specific strategic direction. What do I do? And then, thirdly, what data does is it actually tracks improvement. Now, the cool part about that is that's kind of tracks improvement, which in turn motivates. But now we flip the switch a little bit about what's motivating. The motivation is how can I continue to improve versus I'm not in a good place, right? So
Yeah.
that's where data can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I love that you talked about that, just seeing the data from the client, right, is really something that's transformative. It's one thing that you think you're doing awesome, and then you hear somebody, anybody who's ever participated in a 360 review process where you
Oh,
hear what your peers and maybe your, subordinates, think of you or whatever and your habits, uh, or had your kids as a dad of a college freshman and a high school freshman, every once in a while, they'll do their dad impression and they'll mock me or something, and it is comical, and I'm glad we have the relationship where they feel they can do that to me. But it's also occasionally like, "Oh, darn it, I do that. Is that
yeah,
really what I do?"
yeah.
So it is kind of fun, but it does to your point, it spurs action occasionally. It's in it, especially when it is presented in a way that the hope is that we want to get better. Like, I imagine when you send surveys or you go out to the client with this, it is, "Hi, I'm your advisor. I want to
Hmm.
do a better job for you."
Correct. Yes. Very important.
However, as I was thinking about this stuff, I wonder, maybe you've had this pushback and or maybe you haven't, but I wonder if an advisor's like, "Hey, I don't even wanna put those ideas in my client,
Mhm.
like, I don't wanna hear I don't wanna, like, as an example, I was seeing something, I saw you actually, you were on, Matt Reiner's podcast, and Matt has been on my show a few different times, and we've kinda cross-pollinated the shows, if you will. Uh, and you were talking about asking about fees as an example,
Mhm.
the clarity of fees and so forth, and I imagine there might be some advisors like, "I don't want my clients asking questions about fees. That's how we make our money here." Like, I'm perfectly fine with them not really knowing exactly how they're getting charged and so forth. So, how do you get advisors to feel comfortable with this process?
Yeah. So two thoughts around that. One, it's not always comfortable. In fact, we'd argue that these questions that are being asked that we so let me preface that for a moment. What we believe is an approach that will help drive more modern financial advice. Yes, I'm stealing a
Yeah.
phrase. Is to use an additional set of metrics, right? We've got our traditional industry metrics, which are useful and important, right? That are
Yeah.
focused on the advisor and their performance. But by adding an additional lens, an additional set of metrics that are more of the client talking about the advisor, that's what really helps us enhance the game and elevate that game, right? Now, and anytime you measure something new, you measure something different, right? Measurement inherently sort of includes a judgment, right? Hey, we're
Sure.
measuring it,
Yeah.
which means then a measurement's either good or bad, right? So there's a judgment related to it, and that can be uncomfortable. And then the kind of questions that we're actually asking, and we talked about this on Matt's webinar or podcast, but these are core advice attributes that make advice advice. They're the attributes that, when delivered in aggregate, lead to exceptional advocacy. And it's the way we've cracked organic growth. Now, it all comes from the research that I led at JD Power, all published Barron's in different places. But they're pointing questions, right? So
Mm.
there is some discomfort. Now, the second part is, if I do have advisors say, oh, I don't want to poke the bear on that. It's like, listen, the bear's already there. So just because you're not asking the question, do you see value in your fees? You're not asking the question, do I have your best interest in mind? If they have a particular thought, it's still there. Better for you to
Sure.
find out by asking than to find out in some other way, whether it's a cat or some kind of regulatory event. So that's the way we look
So
at it.
I gotta ask the paved question. Is it because I always try to put myself in the advisor's shoes or the audience's shoes, and I'm sitting there going, so we've had this conversation. It's very similar to when an advisor is thinking about succession planning, and he or she is considering selling their business. So they're getting to the point where they're like, all right, I'm ready to step back, get onto my glide path into retirement or whatever, change, whatever reason they're choosing to exit the business.
Mhm.
And the question I always ask about these conversations is like, once you talk to your clients, like, hey, just so you know, I'm thinking about selling my business. I have found my successor. His name's Tom Rieman. And then you go through what the advisor is now, the client, and the worry for the advisor might be like, as soon as I tell my client that there's going to be an advisor change in their life, they might go, well, wait a minute. Maybe I should evaluate other advisors at this time.
Mhm.
And I wonder, right? Because, like, hey, I took me a while to choose Mike. I've loved working with Mike. I've been with Mike for 30 years. Maybe it's time to make a change. He's saying he's changing. Maybe I should look around, right? And evaluate this whole thing. So I wonder, have you ever had an advisor kind of raise that discomfort? Like, hey, Tom, if I start asking these questions, you know, maybe the clients are like me. Maybe they've plateaued. They've been comfortable. Like, hey, they know they get in charge for this. They meet with me once a year or whatever, and they get my emails, seeing how things are going. Blah blah blah. But you know how it is. It's a pain in the butt to switch advisors. If all of a sudden I raise these things that they might be like, oh no, I don't feel good about that. You
Mhm.
know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah,
do
no.
you get that pushback? Have you received that or it?
So not specifically to that, but I think that raises the very issue if we think about elevating the advice experience. And let's get that's a kind of a macro phrase, but if we think about the executives at the broker dealers and RAAs
Mm,
responsible for running these firms, driving growth, and all of that. Right now, in many ways, we work within a sort of a legacy framework on how we view advice,
mm,
how we measure success, and all of that. And there's a level of comfort and stability in that. What we are noting, saying, and we think we have proved is that we can add an additional layer, additional lens, additional metrics to look at the success, which will actually elevate that success. Now,
mm,
inherently, what you're doing is you're messing with that stability. And in fact, I was on
yeah.
a call yesterday, and I know when I presented the data and the additional metrics, I know what was going through the guy's head, and it was a senior person at an RIA, was that this is potentially going to make the work I've been doing in the past not look as good as it does through the current
Mm,
lens, right?
yeah.
But you use the word plateaued. You've
Yeah,
plateaued, right? So we're elevating the game in large part, and I'll use this phrase, think about it. You perform to what you're measured on. So
yeah,
by changing the performance standards, you're elevating the game. Now, whenever you elevate the game and you change the performance standards, usually you lag that performance standard because you haven't been focusing on it, because you haven't been measured on it. And that's okay.
right.
So there are those in the industry, whether it's in the broker dealer world or at the advisor world level, that will push back, not feel comfortable. And you know what? That's okay, because
Yeah.
ultimately the industry will leave them behind.
Yeah, I love it, and you know what? That's a fantastic segue into the next thing I really wanted to talk to you about, and,
Mm,
I always feel I always feel bad about the like, earmuffs for if you're an advisor who's a little sensitive, put your put your earmuffs up, cover your ears for a second, but, I've spent a lot of time talking to executives at wealth management firms, and particularly a lot of time with practice management professionals, right, who
mhm,
are their whole raison d'etre, they get up in the morning to try to get the best out of advisors, to help advisors grow their business. But I have heard this by a lot of practice management leaders at firms. They will, and these are some big firms with thousands and thousands of
mhm,
advisors. They'll look you right in the eye and they go, "Mike, here's the problem. Advisors are really crappy business owners."
mhm,
And they don't and they'll tell you horror stories, or they'll tell you the stuff like, "Hey, listen, these guys are making $500,000 a year, but they're living like they make $700,000 a
mhm,
year," or, they just don't, pay attention to marketing or whatever. And so they'll go down these litany of challenges, and of course, like, that maybe they're just relaying some of the frustrations of their job, and then, of course, they've got the ultra high performers and so forth, and that's where you're basing some of your stuff on. Uh, but some of this is understandable, and it leans into what you were just talking about, changing based on what you're measuring, based on what you're measured on or what you are measuring. Because, most of these advisors got their start when they were still called stockbrokers, right? They
mhm,
they built their book of business, as they call it. Uh, and frankly, at many firms, they're still called producers. Oh, yeah, so and so is a top producer, or this
mhm,
guy's a, whatever, producer, a new producer, younger producer. They're not called business owners, even though they're in an independent broker dealer environment where they are, the IBD is a contractor for them. That's
mhm.
that's that's a vendor, right? That's not their boss. Um, so, they had to shift, though, over the last couple of decades from commission models, selling product, to an AUM model, right? They're managing relationships, and a pool of assets, of course, is a function of that, and that's how they're compensated. But they had to navigate through that change. And then, so whereas once before you were a top producer because you sold X in a quarter, now it's you have this AUM and it produces this much fee. So they've already had to do that type of stuff. Um, but the challenge that I think happens is because of that AUM model, they make money no matter what. Market's up, market's down, I still made money. If the market's up, awesome. I made more money this
Mhm.
quarter. I didn't do anything. If I didn't work anymore. How do you and I know it's a long-winded intro to this. How do you go about helping advisors think of themselves as business owners? Because that's the next great transition, I think, is you've got to get out of this mindset of, like, you're a sales guy, you're a broke, you know what I'm saying? Like, you are running a business.
So, great question. And first question to follow that would be, what kind of business are you actually in? So there are
Mm,
things that are often assumed and unsaid. So I agree with you completely. Run it like a business, which means many of the things practice management professionals do and do really, really well today in terms of
yeah.
systematizing process and marketing and back office and all those things driving efficiencies are really important. But it's like taking one more step back and saying, but what business are you actually in? And
Mm,
the real key difference there is, are you in a sales profession? Are you in the business of selling financial products, or are you in the business of advice? Now, that may sound at a high level kind of esoteric, but there's actually a very distinct difference in the
yeah,
value
sure.
proposition, in process, in depth of client relationship, in longevity, and very much so in organic growth. Um, so that's the first thing. And then, when we think about the change part to running things differently, they're happy. And we keep coming back to that, like, I'm good. I make money, whether I bring new people in or not, and life's okay. But the reality is there's still some fairly significant attrition risk baked into a lot of books. Because when we look at the data, we see high levels of satisfaction. And I've talked about this. I think I talked about this on Matt's podcast. There's high levels of satisfaction, but it's not correlated with advocacy, right? So that's just because they're satisfied doesn't mean they're satisfied with anything of great value. So it's one of those instances. As soon as the client does see that better advisor, they're going to trit out. Um, but ultimately, Mike, what it comes back to, so if we say run it as a business, so do you have as a business a compelling and differentiated value proposition? Now, as soon as I say that, everybody goes, "Oh, I know how to do my value prop." I tell them why I'm in the business and how I'm unique and different. So Michael Kitcey's had a thing out, an article last week. It talked about the 100 ways advisors bring value to clients. And the job, in many ways, if I read this correctly in my scanning of it, was how do you best construct the right parts of those 100 to deliver to your niche? Now, true, but it's absolutely not true too, because there's one fundamental thing every single advisor should deliver and doesn't necessarily do. And it's the very definition of advice, which is helping people make good decisions. That is the fundamental way that we bring value in the marketplace. I was asked on a panel a couple weeks ago, how do you deal with all the differences in client segmentation and differences in clients? And I know the answer they wanted me to say was come back with was, well, personalization. And instead I said, actually, what we need to do is do that fundamental thing that is common to every client and deliver great advice before you even think about personalizing. So fundamentally, the answer is what do you have a compelling and differentiated value prop that's going to drive your business success and allow all those other business activities to efficiency and process to actually be fed by an incredibly valuable engine. That makes sense?
Yeah, no, I love it. It's really interesting, and it really lends credence to some of the changes we've been seeing in the last decade in the industry, right? We've seen younger advisors who are entering this industry
Mm,
be more business minded. They are seeing it the way you're describing it there, that they are providing a true, genuine advisory service. We're seeing an uptick in advisors who are also financial planners,
mhm,
right? Um, not just asset managers, not
mhm,
just managing your portfolio, right? Because your life, if I'm coming to you and you tell me that you're an investment advisor or that you're my broker, right, as they did in the old days, well, I get it. You're managing my money. You're managing my investment assets, and then I got a bank over here that's managing my banking assets and so
mhm,
forth. But if I come to you and you tell me you're a financial advisor, like, if you knew nothing about, like, if you came from another country and you walked in and you talked to somebody who presented his or herself as a financial advisor, what would you think that person does? They advise on all your finances.
you
So,
would think,
what
yeah.
touches my finances? My household budget touches my finances. So,
Mhm,
right? My real estate investments, whether I own an investment property, vacation property, whether that or whatever. Uh, do I own a business? Right? And how does that business fit into my overall financial life, right? You would advise me on my finances, right? Like, most financial advisors, though, are really just advising on stocks, bonds, and mutual funds that are managed under their
mhm.
umbrella.
But
They're
Mike,
not providing
Mike,
financial advice.
I'm gonna jump in on this for a second. We use the word advising. What's the definition of advice? So if I'm gonna
Right.
ask you, I forget where you live. Where do you live again?
Austin, Texas.
Austin, Texas. So if I'm gonna ask you, like, where should I go to eat? And you want to give me advice. So what's the best kind of advice you could give me if I'm gonna ask you where I should eat in Austin?
Well, the first question I would ask you is like, what are your diet restrictions, right? Are you a vegan?
There
Because
you
that's going to be a
go.
completely different
There
conversation,
you
right?
go. Right, 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 right. So you're going to ask me a bunch of different questions so you can basically come back
Sure.
around, provide insight, equip and
Yeah.
enable me to make a good decision based on, now I'm going to
Right.
flip over to our industry's phrasing, make a decision that's aligned with my goals, my values, and my aspiration. That's advice.
Right.
Now,
Yeah.
that process right there I don't know what the percentage is, but 80% of advisors do not do that in our industry. The ones that do have much deeper client relationships, much stickier um, books of business, more organic growth, more valuable entities to realize in a liquidity event. And that's what we help advisors do.
You're really hitting on an important part, and I hope that advisors who are listening to this, are not like, "Mike hates us." They know that. You know I love you, baby. So the what it really is, when you think about as a business owner, how do I serve my clients? That is what you keep, kinda getting at, Tom. Like, what service do I provide for my clients? What value do I provide for my clients? Yes, a value you provide for your clients is managing their investable assets, right, in a portfolio, and you're charging a fee for that. What other value do they have? If you think about every other business that you patronize out there, they will start to offer uh, vertical or horizontal value chain for their clients. You'll start to realize, like, well, what else might Tom need in his life? Oh, well, maybe we could bring a CPA under our roof and help Tom with some of his tax planning. Right? Now, I as the financial advisor, the solo, the investment guy, that's not in my I'm not gonna go back to school and become a CPA, but we could bring a CPA into the firm or partner with one and offer that type of advice. We start to look through our client roster and realize many of them are business owners. Well, maybe we wanna bring somebody who's like a succession planning, so, a valuation expert in who's good at helping them navigate that path. Because at some point in time, Tom's gonna sell his business and want to retire and travel the world with his wife, he's told me. So let's get that advice in here, right? So uh, it really is that, right? It's thinking of it yourself as a business and the value you provide.
It is. And I mean, if we go one step further, and I'm going to bring it all the way back to the BD executive, because I think the BD executive's job is to help the advisor ultimately succeed. But so James Lee, who sits on our advisory board, he's the past president of the FPA board of directors. I don't know if you know
I know
James.
James. Had him
Yeah,
on a podcast. He's a
yeah.
great dude. I love him.
Oh, he's awesome. And he for
Fellow Star Wars nerd, by the way.
oh
Just so you
really? I
know.
know I didn't know that yet. Yeah, but yeah. Well, another conversation, right? Um, so what I heard him say a lot last year, and really kind of drew me towards him, was that financial advice is the fourth great profession. Right. And so
Yes.
think about it. I've always, financial advice can have a profound impact on a client's life, on their family, on their community and society as a whole. Right. And so hence the fourth great
Yeah.
profession. Now, again, it's
Yeah.
kind of an altruistic statement, but let's now boil that into a nutshell that says the value of advice as an advisor to you, Mike, my client, is to help you translate your wealth. I'm going to use a phrase from someone else in the industry, a behavioral psychologist, translate
Yeah.
your wealth into a life of meaning and contentment. Now, there's a lot of working pieces underneath that, but that's the ultimate goal for you to have clarity and confidence on the path you're going on to help you navigate through the nuances and changes in your financial and life situation, right? There's an advisor.
Yeah.
That's a big value prop. Now, if that valuable value prop, and that is way more valuable than saying, hey, I can help you realize financial freedom or one of the other, kind of poster statements that advisors will make. Now imagine replicating that at the BD level. So you can get more and more of the advisors through process driven by data. Yes, I'm coming back to what we do,
Yeah.
driven by data, success measured by this alternative lens of data. So more and more advisors deliver on the what financial advice can be, which is an incredibly valuable, deliverable, exchangeable for a tremendous amount
Yeah.
of wealth and growth, right? That's the goal. It comes back to the data, like where are you today in the context of that ideal? Where are the gaps? What can you work on strategically? How are you making improvement? And then start over again, rinse and repeat, right?
Yeah.
So that's what we're about in our industry, and that's why we exist, because we
Yeah.
know that financial advice is way more valuable than most people think.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really fascinating. I love it. Quick little interjection here. If you want to check out the conversation with James, you can head over to the Augmented Advisor podcast, where we had James Lee on when he was the president of the Financial Planning Association. And he talked about that fourth grade profession. Fantastic conversation. I'll make sure we get that linked up here in the show notes. and you can go check that out a little further. Um, let's get to the aha moment here, because this is always the big awakening for a person when they're taking in something new. And anybody who's tried to get folks who have been doing something away for a long time and they have all their financial incentives are baked into a certain model, as many advisors
Mhm.
and the broker dealer wealth management professionals are. At some point in time, there has to be a, oh, okay, now I get it. I can't not do this now. I got to
Mhm.
do this new thing, right? We've got to bring it into the business. It totally makes sense. And you can look back throughout history. At what point in time do we want to start using the internet? There's a resist. The internet's just a fad or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden somebody's like, oh, wait a minute, we can do business more efficient. We can cast a wider net, da, 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 da. So what's the piece of advice, or excuse me, what's the piece of insight
Mm.
about an advisor's practice that you at Practice Intel generate that you would say generates the biggest, I get, all right, I get it now. This, yes, this is the thing. What,
Mhm.
because you, and I guess, we'll get the next follow up will be what's a piece of advice you present to a practice management professional that gets that same
Yeah.
result. But let's start with the advisor. What is it that you put in front of most advisors and they're like, yep, that rings true.
So I'll go back and I say with the BD executive, and I'm actually going to share. I know it's this podcast, but I'm going to share a slide. Okay.
Oh, great. Yeah,
Then
please
it's
do.
basically the research that I led at JD Power. Again, this has all been published both in my articles in Barron's and a
Mhm.
variety of other ways as well. Um,
And by the way, we do publish this podcast video. So if you're listening to this on audio and you want to check it out, swing on over to the video feed, whether it's YouTube or over at finservmarketing.com. You can check it out. We'll have this up there for you.
yeah. So basically, here's the slide. So I shared this slide with numerous C-suite folks um, over about a year and a half period, and every single one, it was like dropping a bomb in the room. So what this simply shows is how advice is being delivered today, and in the context of the viewpoint from the client. And what we were able to do is identify the core attributes that mattered most to clients, the things that, when delivered in aggregate, led to the highest levels of advocacy. And you'll see in the dispersion here from the ideal to the average to poor, the attributes are the same. It's just a question of how well is the advisor delivering on that attribute. And most people, when they see this dispersion, they go, yeah, I get it. There's a small subset of really great, a bunch of kind of in the middle, and a bunch, maybe we wouldn't want to get too near. But this is the data. And when you look at the actual attributes, not rocket science. Is the advice comprehensive? Do you understand me? Do you act in my best interest?
Mm,
Do I understand what I'm paying? Now, not rocket science, but as you noted earlier, some of these questions are a little poignant, and some advisors do
mm,
hesitate in terms of asking them. But if they don't ask them, they may just not learn what clients are already thinking, and that's not a good thing. So this is that aha moment, is this particular data. Now, that's at the industry level, Mike. When we think about that, which is great, but what about the advisor level? And so that's why Practice Intel was created, because industry level data says there's a real issue. Compelling business analytics that can drive strategic change, can motivate, can provide direction, right? But it did not exist at the practice level, which is why we created what we did, to bring that institutional consumer research all the way down to the advisor so they can do their own research to
yeah.
discern what their clients think about those attributes, about the dispersion. And we have one more piece, which is called the Relationship Quality Index, which measures net promoter score, advocacy, believe strongly in that, but also not only the advocacy, but the value and quality of the experience being advocated for. So we include loyalty, trust, value for fees, and overall experience all rolled into that, which, by the way,
Right.
impacts practice valuations too. That's maybe another
Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah. By
So,
the way, so for those advisors or well, I think all the practice management professionals will know what the net promoter score is, but for the advisor in the audience who doesn't, it's a really basic, usually one question like, would
it
you
is.
recommend us to a peer? Right? Would you recommend this business? And you've probably actually received an email from somebody you use, some service or product you bought with. Would you recommend this based on your purchase or whatever? And you add it up. There's usually it scores 1 to 5, correct? And then Okay.
Actually, 1 to
Uh-huh.
10. It's 1 to 10. I
1
think
to 10. Okay,
yeah,
so I
1 to 10.
butchered it. So it goes 1 to 10.
Yeah.
And so like you look anybody who's above an 8 is as a promoter, blah blah blah. And you score it and then you add it up like what's your average score and are we doing better or not? Because that really comes down to something of value. And for advisors, this should resonate, right? Almost every advisor you talk to will say, "Well, we get a lot of our business from referrals. That's where all our business comes from, referrals. All our growth comes from referrals." And it's like you ask the next question, like, "Well, what are you doing to generate referrals? Are you doing anything active, or are you just waiting around for them?"
Mhm.
But a fun follow up exercise is, "Are you referable?" Net
Mm.
Promoter Score could help you with that concept. Like, are your clients thinking of you as a person, as a service provider that should be referred to other people?
And so, Mike, we use I mean, that I actually heard this years ago, and I love it that you don't want to ask for referrals; you just want to be referable. But
Yeah,
I use this phrase in an article that's going to be published here in the next shortly about we want to create enthusiastic advocates. You want to make that experience so compelling. And by the way, advocacy is just an external manifestation of an internal belief. You do it yourself. You believe in it so strongly. Like, I got to tell Mike about this thing. It is so great.
yeah,
And it's not just like, hey, I got
yeah,
someone over here. You might want to call him. It's like, no, this is great. Here's what happens. Here's what I did. Here's why you should work with him.
yeah,
Can I get him on? Can we have dinner and I'll bring him over? That's
yeah.
advocacy, which is different than just a over the transom.
100%, 100%. Like, so if you're an advocate for a financial advisor, you found out that somebody in your life was having a life moment, a money in motion moment, changing
Mhm.
jobs, whatever. Like, hey, talk to your advisor because make sure you talk to your advisor about that. And if you don't have one, use my guy or use my lady because they are the one for you. And by the way, we've all done that. Think about how many times you recommend a restaurant or a movie or a TV show, right? Why? It brought you immense joy, right? You loved it so much, or the service was awesome
Mhm.
and the food was great. Everything about it, the vibe was cool. You went on and on about you got to do this place, you got to go there, right? Well, the same can be for an advisor as well.
Mike, just pausing on that for a second. So, yes. Now, looking back at the McKinsey study with organic growth, that the 10% were raising 28 new households, next decile 12, next quartile
Yeah.
set, basically drops off the cliff. So, how many
Yes.
clients are out there going, having this amazing, compelling experience with advisors based on that, based on that data?
Yeah.
Not many, right?
Yeah.
We got to fix that. That's what we got to fix.
Well, you know what I think it is?
Hmm.
I honestly believe this. If you just think about yourself as a financial consumer, it's a thing I have, and I'm glad I have it, whether it's a good banking relationship or it's a good financial advisor. I'm glad I have this. I like my advisor. I'm glad I'm on track to achieve my financial goals. I don't want to think about it too much, right? And in our society, part of that is because money's really uncomfortable for our society. You don't have enough. You kind of feel a little bit of shame that you don't have enough. You haven't achieved what you want to. You might not be able to so it's a really uncomfortable feeling. And if you have a lot, you also are supposed to feel a little guilty and shameful because you're
Mm.
rich and other people don't have as much and all this type of stuff, right? So there's it's an uncomfortable thing. We don't talk about money publicly in our society, all that often. So yeah, it's almost like there needs to be a bit of a cultural shift that can be driven by the advisors of making the person feel better about this
Yeah,
experience.
but I even so I am the consumer of financial advice. We have an advisor, and his name's
Yeah.
Paul Rosen. He's with Platinum Peak, a Valmark firm, and I've been in this industry a long time. I had a lot of advice to choose from. I landed on him very, very easily. He is first call after family. He is an integral part of our life. So the way you kind of describe that, yeah, yeah, no, he is. He loves us. We love him. I mean, that's the going back to the fourth great profession. Now, this is delivering it at the apex. Not every advisor is going to get there, but we clearly have a big gap between even near the apex and where most are, right? But the nature of that relationship is so embedded, so valuable. Um, you know what I mean? So there is such a thing as an ideal, and at least something to shoot for.
So I know we're kind of kicking for home here. We don't have much time left with each other, but I want to make sure I get to this big question because and if it feels a little elephant in the roomish, if you will, time. and what to do and how to get this into action. I was just on a webinar with Broadridge, um, discussing their fifth annual marketing research study for financial advisors, and they ask advisors, like how much are they spending on marketing, how much time are they spending on marketing, how effective is their marketing, yada yada yada. And the the number one like constraint isn't money, it's time. They're like, well, I don't have much time, da, 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 and they spend like an hour on it, maybe week or so. It's really just anemic. And most advisors will tell you they're too busy, right? So even if they've seen the aha slide and they're like, "Yeah, man, this is I do need to do some things." How what are the first steps to take and how do they manage it in their business to get the progress and make the changes you're describing?
So I'm not saying, let me put it this way. You ever heard the phrase, it's simple, but it's not easy?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, can be complex, but it's not hard. How about that? We'll flip that on the
Okay.
head.
I like it. Yeah.
So, because there are some moving parts to it, but it does start first with saying, I want to know what my clients think about the advice experience. It starts with saying, I want to include a new frame of reference, a new set of metrics to define success. And that's at the
Mhm.
advisor and the firm level because it's a very telling. That's the start. And then it's just a matter of, like anything, prioritizing. So we go back, by the way, to the marketing, and it kills me. Market, market, market. Yeah. So if you're a frozen hamburger out of a box, okay, undifferentiated, not very compelling, you can throw that to a lot of, no offense to advisors, but a lot of consumers
Yeah.
view advisors as just that. Doesn't matter how much you market it, you're still a frozen hamburger out of the box. Okay. So, and by the way, I had nothing like a great fresh ground burger. So,
Yeah.
um,
You
so
you know, you must know I'm a food lemming, and so what is going to happen in the next 5 days is I will be getting a really good hamburger. Because thanks a lot, dude. Because
that,
I cannot hear good food and not want
oh,
to
I
go
love it.
get it, so
That's
that's what's
awesome.
happening in my life.
That's awesome. Um, so that's the start. And then it's about prioritizing. So because we're
Yeah,
working on the base fundamental offering, the very existence of what you are, right?
yeah,
It's working on what you do that you start to prioritize, okay, these are the three things I can do. We're going to dive into some of the practice development content, easy, scalable, cool,
yeah,
interactive, high production content that we offer purposely because my gosh, a lot of the virtual content is really not that. And start to figure out how can I start to move the needle. And then I'm going to keep sending the surveys out. It's tracking. How are we doing? Just think differently. Maybe it's one of the things that comes back is my clients don't understand the fees they pay. And by the way, that's not about transparency. It never has been. It's about something entirely different. It's about the level of engagement. And you start working on it, right? So that it starts with those baby steps. Remember, data hydrates. It's a virtuous
yeah,
circle. So it illuminates. Okay, better do something. I'm going to choose to do something. It directs. Where am I going to start? What's that first step I'll take? It's right there.
yeah,
And then it tracks improvement, right? And listen, there's those that aren't going to do it. And as I said, the industry is going to leave them behind. Now, maybe not for a year or
yeah,
5 years or 10 years. Mike, the last comment there, we think about these advisors that say, I'm good. I'm sort of coasting downhill now. I'm going to retire, succession plan here in the next 2, 3 years. I can take it easy. It's actually the worst time
yeah,
to take it easy because the reality
yeah,
is business practice valuations take into account organic growth and embedded process for organic growth. So your most go-go years for organic growth should be the last couple 3 years if you want to get four times your revenue versus one
yeah.
and a half, right? So
And I can tell you that is 100% true. We produce shows for SkyView Partners. And so not only do they do lending, they have investment banking. And that is exactly one of the things they
mhm,
look at when they're talking to sellers of their practice. If you want to maximize valuation, there's got to be growth there. Because if I'm thinking about buying a business, I'm not just buying based on the revenue you have today, I'm buying a revenue stream for the future, right? So I'm hoping that's a growing revenue stream. And look at the valuations of publicly traded securities. The ones that are growing fast actually get
Yeah.
higher
And,
valuations,
and
right?
Mike, I know we're getting near the end here, but why not just embed that growth engine 10 years, 15 years before you even get there and just make it a regular
Yeah.
process part of your business, which is delivering great advice and tracking it, knowing where you are. And then, yeah, so that's much easier than having to put the foot on the gas, the last 2 years if you've been coasting.
Love it. Love it. Okay. I will be remiss if I don't ask this question. There's one last question I want to get to you before I let you go. Um, we're doing a podcast. It's the beginning of 2024, right? And you got to touch on AI, right? And I was on the website, Practice Intel website, which we have linked here in the show notes. And there's a tile that's titled
Mm,
Practice AI. So, what's your vision for AI and how it will benefit advisors in the wealth management industry?
yeah. So, appreciate that question. And listen, AI, we're like the pitchers warming up in the first inning. I mean, that's where we are in AI. We're
Yeah.
so early in AI. But one reality is these are the models that are being used in generative AI. The power of those models is training those models and training them with
Yeah.
unique data sets. Um, and so what we're going to be doing, and we already have a partner in place who is sort of a plug and play, very advanced expertise around AI modeling and usage, is we're going to be taking the data that we're creating once we get large enough data sets, is we're going to be training our own AI models with the unique client. Remember, we're bringing a unique client perspective,
Mm,
unique framework of measuring success. We're going to be using that data to train the models. And the ideal is we're going to be able to create an AI model that actually recommends and even predicts the outcomes of next best action around the client engagement process, the advice experience, which is a little bit beyond now. Like right now, it's like sell insurance or pitch this, or
yeah.
maybe I'm being too simple. But we want to make this where it's has a pretty dramatic effect on that advice experience, and we're excited about that. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Awesome. Well, Tom, this has been a great conversation. Send people over to the Practice Intel website. You're also active on LinkedIn. What else you got to plug? Like, where else should people find you and be looking out for you?
Man, I mean, it's prackintel.com. Go check out the website,
Yeah.
click on a demo, come see us. We're at conferences. Believe it or not, I'm going to be at the CFA Society of New York in a couple of weeks on a panel on wealth tech. How about that? So really, really elevating. But we'll be at the Orion conference just as a participant. We'll be there in a handful of weeks. But yeah, just watch in the trades, watch on LinkedIn, come and get a
Yeah.
demo. Be part of that. That early adopter crowd.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you for coming on the show, dude.
Hey, Mike, really appreciate it. I still want to know where to eat in Austin. Okay.
Well, as soon as we stop recording here, I'll give you a whole list. It's great. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about food.
Obviously. No, thanks a
Thanks,
lot,
Tom.
Mike. Really
Appreciate
appreciate
it.
it. Be well. See you.
Thank you very much for listening to and or watching this episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. It's always fantastic to have you with us. Huge thanks to my man, Tom Rieman, for coming on the show. Lots of nerdy stuff. I really enjoyed this conversation. And by the way, Tom, I will get you those recommendations for where to eat in Austin, Texas. You might be surprised. I get lots of emails every year from people who are coming to visit Austin asking, where should I go to eat? So if that's a question you have, or if that's an answer to the question you have, hit me up. I'm basically at Mike Langford, as I told you, everywhere, or just podcast at finsermarketing.com. Love to hear your favorite taco joint, barbecue place, uh, place to get beers, All right. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. Be safe and be nice to each other. We'll see you next time on the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. Bye.